I'm not sure if you noticed this, but Andre's Zelda Breath of the Wild analysis is long. Like, really long. So long that it's probably hard for some of you to even sit down and watch it all in one sitting. But we're here to help by making it all just a little bit more manageable and breaking up the analysis into multiple parts. In this excerpt, we look at everything we can see in each corner of the map, mark where certain landmarks can be found, and more. Take it away, Andre.
Now, we've already covered the plateau pretty darn well, but the thing about the plateau is that it's your entry point into the rest of the world, because once you get the paraglider, you can then glide from it in any direction you choose. Yep, the world really is your oyster. So let's take a look at what might be waiting for Link beyond the plateau's boundaries. And let's go ahead and start with the north and work our way around the world clockwise. And of course, the biggest point of interest to the north is Hyrule Castle, which we've already talked about a fair amount. Now, from this vantage point, it really doesn't seem like it's all that far away. But looks can be deceiving, because we know exactly how far away it really is, since we placed a pin on it during E3 showing its exact location on the map. And we measure that distance, and it's roughly the length of 2.5 plateaus away. From the plateau, obviously. So yeah, it's pretty far. And that's not even halfway to the edge of the visible map, which is about 120% of that same distance. Again, this is a big world. Now, even though we've already discussed Hyrule Castle a fair amount, there's still even more we haven't touched on yet, which we can see even better if we enhance the contrast to the image. First up is the fact that we can see a path leads right up to the castle, before then winding up and to the left, presumably to the castle entrance itself. Although, there does appear to be a gap in the path as you get close. So could there be a moat surrounding the castle like there has been in past games? We might just see a glimpse of what could be water in this zoomed out picture down here, and here. So we wonder that gap might indicate that you won't be able to easily reach the castle, or at least not right away. But could he climb up to it instead, or maybe use his paraglider? Maybe, but he might not be able to climb those pillars that are made out of the same material as the shrines, which it seems like they might be, and there doesn't appear to be anything else close by they could paraglide from either. And speaking of gaps, in one of the more zoomed out pictures released for the game, we can see what might be a gap in the castle itself, as if it's perched above the ground, exposing the mountain behind it. It could just be a visual trick, but we can see the exact same thing in a picture at a different angle. In fact, the right side of the castle sure does look rather mountainous. It all looks very remote and intimidating. A bit more wild, if you will. Especially with those weird spikes sticking out the side of the castle. What's going on there? Are they related to Ganon in some way? They might be, especially considering the entire castle appears to be purple, a bit like Ganon. And finally, we can see the hallmark spires of Hyrule Castle that top the towers, including what may be a bridge connecting them back to the castle. Okay, and that covers it for Hyrule Castle, but what about everything that leads up to it from the plateau? Well, as it turns out, that's exactly where this Guardian battle takes place. In fact, if you freeze it here, we can actually see the plateau in the distance. There's a Temple of Time, and there's a Plateau's Tower. And speaking of towers, we can see the one that belongs to this region close by, and it's clearly already been activated by Link as it's blue with the antenna-like things in the raised position. So our guess is that the tower is somewhere around here on the map, with a Guardian scene taking place not too far east of it. But besides that, and some nearby trees, this area seems to be mostly open fields, which of course is perfect for a Guardian battle. But there is a branching path here that splits through the field. One's heading east, another west, and we wonder if this one heading north might lead to the castle. We can also see a few flags around here that appear to mark the trail's path, perhaps making it easier to spot from a distance. And finally, there are some ruins around here too. Could that be where the Guardian came from? Now we actually get a much better look at this general area in this far out view overlooking the plateau. Look, here's a tower in the field, and we think these might be the ruins we just pointed out. And from this vantage point, we can see how open the field really is, with only the occasional patch of trees breaking it up. Although it does seem to get more heavily forested near the plateau wall. And we can also partially see where that western path leads, bending south toward the plateau, before possibly heading east again over the hill. So that pretty much covers the region the Hyrule Castle is in, but there's another region just behind it. Unfortunately, it's too far to make out much of anything, besides some rolling hills dotted with trees, and some distant mountains behind them. But we can at least see where that region's tower is, behind and to the right of Hyrule Castle, which we're guessing puts us somewhere around here on the map. Alright, so that covers the north. So let's turn our attention to the northeast, where we can see a smoldering volcano. And you probably don't need me to tell you that this is more than likely Death Mountain, just like nearly every other volcano in the Zelda series. And like with Hyrule Castle, we actually put a peg on it too, revealing that this is its exact location on the map. Now the volcano does look especially menacing this time, with lava pouring down the sides and it constantly spewing two separate plumes of smoke into the air. And check out those jagged peaks that appear to surround it for quite some distance. And while we're on this shot, we can clearly see the location of two towers. The one just in front is a tower for this same region, and although it appears to be to the left of the volcano from this vantage point, from the perspective of the plateau, it's actually to the right. And based on our measurements, we're pretty sure it'll be found right about here on the map. Now that second tower in the back belongs to the neighboring region to the east, which we get another look at from this angle. And thanks to an in-game peg, we know it's located precisely here on the map. Now generally, Death Mountain is as far north as you can go in most Zelda games, but that doesn't appear to be the case here, as there's not only a ton of room behind it on the map, but we can see the mountains extend even beyond it in-game, so we wouldn't be surprised if there are multiple ways up Death Mountain this time. Now predictably, the terrain gets rougher and more mountainous leading up to the volcano, but before that, we can see Central Hyrule still appears to be mostly fields with the occasional patches of trees. Although, if we keep zooming out, we can see a lake or a small pond closer to the plateau. And you see that nearby ruined building there, with the window? We think that may just be where this scene of the ducks from the trailer took place, since we can see a similar looking structure there also by a lake. Now, if we turn our attention a little more eastbound, we can see another tower in the field. And we narrowed it down to belonging to this region, somewhere around here. Now, just east of that tower, we can see a massive clouds mysteriously obscuring part of the mountain. And those clouds seem to be there at all times of day. So what exactly are they hiding? Next up, let's turn our attention eastbound where we can find the Twin Peaks, the same ones that were pointed out before as being based on the original Legend of Zelda. And we actually know their exact location on the map too, since we pegged them as well. Now the E3 trailer actually gives us a close-up look at them, and sure enough, it's a pair of mountains with a thin gap separating them. But we can now see the mossy ledges cover both, which should act as resting points for Link if he tries to climb it. And speaking of which, did you notice you can see Link doing just that in the E3 trailer? He may be small, but he's right there. See? And we get a better look at those ledges in this scene with Link flying between the two mountains. And we can see that there's actually a path on either side that appears to wrap around to the front side of the mountains. But even more interesting is the fantastic view we have here, because it gives us a rare glimpse of the world from a completely different angle. Look, there's Hyrule Castle, and here's a Temple of Time and a nearby tower. Now, perhaps the most interesting detail here is that we can see what appears to be a river running between the two mountains and out towards central Hyrule. And assuming that river is the same one as in these pictures, it appears to wind a fair way inland, and it might even connect to the lake in the southeast. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Anyways, this clip also reveals the location of 3 new shrines. There's one far below between the mountains, another to the south closer to the plateau, and a third to the north. And then we also have the region's tower, which we estimate to be on the map somewhere around here. Now there's yet another region behind those Twin Peaks, but of course the mountain's blocking the view. However, we may have a few clues as to what lies beyond, because this scene from the trailer appears to be shot from the plateau side of the Twin Peaks, which we base on the 2 paths we mentioned earlier, as the higher path is now on the opposite side. Which means that everything we can see between them here is what lies beyond. Unfortunately, it's not terribly exciting, being more tree-covered fields and a mountain or two just behind it. Now I don't want to read into it too much since our viewpoint is so narrow, but we can't see anything beyond those mountains. So could we be nearing the land's end? And might there just be ocean beyond? It might make sense given the river here. And it does seem like that might be the case based on the view from Mount Hylia, where we can see glimpses to the east and south of what might be ocean. And speaking of that river, it might hint at a little bit more history to the Twin Peaks than might seem at first glance. As in, maybe these peaks weren't always twins. Instead, maybe they were at one point a single mountain. After all, they are of similar heights. So the river that runs between them may have actually formed the very valley that Link's flying through. But this theory does seem to be at odds with the fact that the Twin Peaks stand alone. As in, there's no higher elevation from which a river could have flowed originally. Unless, of course, our wild idea that the regions could change elevations holds water. Yeah, I said it. Anyways, let's continue our world tour, this time to the southeast, where we find a giant lake that almost runs right up to the edge of the plateau. And based on its size, we think there's a good chance this is Lake Hylia. And like its appearance in past games, we can see several islands here too. There's also a massive bridge here that allows passage across. And from what we can tell, it appears to be positioned diagonally, from the northwest to the southeast. And we actually pegged this one down on the map too, and it can be found precisely right here. And while we're mapping things, we can see the region's towers nearby. In fact, we can see just how close that tower really is to the bridge in this official artwork. And we can see that reflected on the map too, which we also pegged precisely as being right here. Now, the bridge is a little too far away to see much detail from here, but thankfully, the reveal trailer gives us a close-up look in this scene, with Link riding across it westbound. See, there's a Temple of Time on the plateau again. Now, if we take a look at the artwork again, we can see a river connects to the northern half of the lake, which is possibly the same river that runs between the Twin Peaks, as we speculated earlier. Now, of course, this isn't the first bridge to cross a giant lake in Zelda, as Twilight Princess's Lake Hylia also had one too, called the Great Bridge of Hylia. And in fact, they look remarkably similar, with both bridges featuring similarly shaped giant stone entranceways on either end. So could they be the same bridge? Now the bridge in Breath of the Wild is in notably better shape overall. Besides a few missing pillars, it's only suffering from a few cosmetic cracks, as opposed to Twilight Princess's crumbling entranceways. And of course, it's visually more impressive now too, being much longer and now bearing the Hylian crest, which would make sense as a bridge of Hylia. But it is possible this is all just a coincidence and the two aren't connected at all. But as it turns out, this may not even be the first time we've seen this bridge, or at least one like it in Breath of the Wild. Because back when the game was shown off during the Game Awards, back when it was still Zelda Wii U, we pointed out a very similar looking bridge, which was also bookended by nearly identical stone entranceways, and even then noted its striking similarity to the bridge of Hylia. But even though they are similar, they're not quite identical, such as how the actual entrance is now round instead of squarish. So the question is this the same bridge, but just updated since we last saw it? Or are they two separate bridges? Or heck, maybe the game's changed so much since then that it doesn't even really matter. It's impossible to say for sure, but there is one piece of evidence that may have some interesting implications. Okay, so do you remember this old map also from the Game Awards? Yeah, it looks quite a bit different than how it does now. But look at this. Do you see that large lake with a thin line running through it? That's exactly what we originally pegged as being Lake Hylia and that same bridge we just saw. Of course, we weren't certain that they were the same bridges then either. But let's take a close look at its shape, because the bridge appears to split the lake in almost the exact same way, with the majority of the water being found on the left side and a smaller but still sizable portion on the other. And look, you can even see the islands represented here too. So it seems like the Lake Hylia portion of the map might still be accurate at least. But what does this mean for the rest of the map? Well, we overlap the old map with a new one using Lake Hylia as our reference point. It doesn't look like much at first. But wait, if you watch our Game Awards analysis, then you might remember that we pegged this area as being Death Mountain. And sure enough, it matches up perfectly with where we know it is now. And then, do you see that cold looking region over here? Yep, that also lines up perfectly with this snowy peak, which we'll be talking about soon. And then, we can even see the ocean is exactly where we predicted it, running from the northeast corner to the south. And by the way, the light blue portion might indicate the explorable portion of it. And check this out. Do you see the river here? It matches up perfectly with the central region's western and northern border. It's uncanny! In fact, the similarities apply to the eastern side of that river too, matching up with the border of the eastern region. So this is kind of awesome for a couple of reasons. One, it shows that not every border is completely arbitrary, and actually does follow the outline of rivers at points. And two, it might be able to tell us even more about the world than what we currently know. For instance, do you see the arrow there? Yeah, that marks Link's location in the first scene in the Game Awards footage, which as you might have noticed, overlaps with the eastern region that we know almost nothing about, being the region behind the Twin Peaks. So let's take another quick look at that old footage to see what might be waiting for us there. And thankfully, the developers provided us with an awesome view by walking right up to the cliff edge, showing a vast area surrounded by mountains. And it looks pretty hilly down there too. Now remember, this is taking place on the east side of the world, which will place a plateau somewhere over there. Now back then, the developers even pointed out this mysterious looking tower, which is probably this region's true tower. And since they even put a peg on it, we can see that that tower should be somewhere around here on the final map, which thankfully solves another one of our mysteries. Now unfortunately, we don't have time to reanalyze this entire area, so make sure to watch our original analysis for the Game Awards footage for an in-depth look at what can be found here, especially because it seems as relevant as ever now. And besides this area, we think we can figure out what's on the other side of the Lake Hylia bridge too, because that area is much too far away to make out much of note, besides the typical mountains, trees, and fields. Even the close-up from the trailer barely helps since Link starts just in front of the eastern side of the bridge. But in the Game Awards footage, we get to see what might very well have been our first real glimpse of the east side. But how do we know this is the eastern side? Do you remember the tower on the hill just right of the bridge? Well, if we back up the footage, we can see it's in the Game Awards footage too, on the hill just left of the bridge. And since it's on the left here, that means Link has to be approaching from the east. And in case there was any doubt, when Link turns to the right, we can see the volcano, aka Death Mountain, off in the distance, which would only be possible from the east side. So knowing this, that will place a plateau somewhere over here, just like in the trailer, which we're showing again now for comparison. Which means everything we're about to show you should be taking place right around here, or thereabouts. Okay, so for reference, here's a bridge and a tower. So now let's back up the Game Awards footage to the farthest point that we know is still in this general area. And that takes us to these two pillars, which one of the commenters in the original video not only said were suspicious, but also said must be near a dungeon, which is as close as we've gotten to knowing where one might be in the final game. Next, we can see a forest lies just beyond the statues, though with a clearing that leads right up to the eastern side of the bridge. But instead of going to the bridge, Link turns and ventures through that same forest he just passed, and encounters some wild horses. So could this be close to the location where Link found a horse in the trailer? We think it might be because of those mountains in the background, which are found to the south. And that's everything we can link to this area from the Game Awards footage. Finally, you may have noticed that we can see another tower from across Lake Hylia, and that one belongs to the southeasternmost region, which we pegged as this precise location on the map. Okay, and that covers it for the lake and southeastern area. So let's start turning our attention to the south, where we can see a huge mountain range, spanning from the southeast and wrapping around the plateau to the west. And not only is it big, but it's tall, like really tall, dwarfing even the tallest peak in the plateau. So what can we tell about this area? Well, not a whole lot, because the entire thing appears to be pretty barren, at least from this distance. But that might be for a good reason, because it also looks to be a desert-like region. I mean, it has a dry orange hue, and seems to lack most any vegetation, which is in stark contrast to the other terrain we've covered so far. And something else that sets it apart is how multi-layered it is, at least on the side facing the plateau, because we can see that it features multiple flat sections layered on top of each other leading up the mountain. It almost seems like it was made for climbing, and it seems you might have to do quite a bit of climbing to reach a tower at the top, which we also pegged precisely as being located right here, which accounts for this region. Now interestingly, if we zoom in at the tower's base, we can see some kind of wall. More ruins maybe? Now if we turn our attention to the west, we can see, yep you guessed it, even more of the mountain range. But this time, we can see a second peak that appears to be largely separated from the rest, although it does appear it may be connected to the other one via this. Now besides its color being closer to the red end of the spectrum, it otherwise appears to share the same desert setting, with one major exception. If we look at the top, we can just barely see some pine trees, which likely means that the climate is entirely different that high up. But there's something else unusual about the peak here, in that no matter when or where we view it from, it's always obscured by clouds, which is the second time we've seen something like this. So what are those clouds hiding? Maybe the mountain continues even higher than what we can see? Oh, and in case you were wondering where exactly this mountain is, we also precisely pegged it as right here. Now, besides the vast size of these mountains, there doesn't appear to be that much of interest from this side of them. But what about the other side? Well, while we can't speak for the entire mountain range, we can for at least one portion, thanks to this scene of Link running along a sand dune with what appears to be that same mountain range in the background. And we know it has to take place behind them because of this tower right here. Now, I know what you're thinking. Couldn't that be the same tower in the mountains we just pointed out? Nope. That one is quite clearly on top of the mountain, with nothing taller surrounding it. Whereas this one is surrounded by mountains on one side. And since this tower can't be seen from the plateau, that means it has to be behind those mountains. Look, we can even see the mysterious clouds from here too. And better yet, we know exactly which region this should be in too. Because there's only one region that shares that mountain range that we haven't yet assigned a tower to, being this one right here. So now that we know where roughly this takes place, let's see what more we can find out here. And obviously, it's all desert, which might mean that the entire mountain range serves as the gateway to this portion of the world, potentially making the desert a massive area. But hey, Zelda's no stranger to large deserts. We can also see that the backside of that mountain range shares the same layered approach as the other side, once again demonstrating that climbing is likely to be a major part of this region. But as we step back from the mountain, we can see a little more what this area has to offer, including some rocky pillars down here, then sand, lots and lots of sand, culminating with a sand dune that Link's running across here. But what about what's behind the sand dune? Well, based on this scene, even more sand. Shocker, right? But how do we know this for sure? Because we can see the region's tower in the background right there, confirming that this takes place beyond even the sand dune. And by the way, did you notice a massive ribcage here? Could it maybe belong to the same animal as those massive skulls in the plateau? Now that's everything we can glean about this area from the trailer, but a video on Treehouse Live might reveal even more. In it, we can see Link paragliding through very similar terrain. And then there's the fact that he actually starts his descent from atop a tower, that itself sits on top of a high ledge. Yep, just like the tower we were talking about before. So if they are in fact the same towers, that means that Link's flight path in that clip takes him somewhere along this path. And assuming this is the same area, we can see that the area farther out from the mountains does appear to be mostly flat sand. Now we should clarify that despite the similarities, we can't be 100% sure this is the same area. Yeah, we're pretty sure, but because the two vantage points are so different, we weren't able to actually match up any of the rocks between the two clips. At any rate, regardless of where exactly it takes place, there are still some interesting things to note here. First up, look, there's water. Yeah, it's not much, but it does show that this region isn't completely dry, just mostly dry. And next to that is what appears to be some kind of tower with something on top. Is that a creature? It doesn't appear to be moving, so it could be a chest or something. Next, we can see that there actually is some plant life here. Granted, not much, but it's something. After that, we can see that the mountain wall here looks just a little bit too straight edge to be entirely natural. Instead, it may have been carved out. Oh, and if we look down below, we can see another shrine. After that, there's a pair of bridges allowing passage over the gulf here. And as Link flies closer, we can see some kind of creature walking around. Now at first, we thought we were viewing it from the front, and that it might be wearing a mask. But if we back up to this angle, we think it's actually facing away, so we can't be sure if it's friendly or foe. Although it does look like that its back may be armored, perhaps hinting at the latter. And it also seems to be carrying some kind of stick. But is it a walking stick or a beating stick? Now, as Link is closer to the shrine, we can see another one of those carved walls. But this one appears to be much taller than the one before. We can also see some kind of scaffolding-like thing right here, as well as a couple of walkways just above. And that pretty much covers everything in this clip, but this scene from the trailer might reveal a bit more. But before we continue, do you see the rock wall there with the 3 openings? Well, if we go back to the paragliding clip, we can see those same 3 openings way off in the distance, showing that's where that scene takes place. And that scene shows some wooden catwalks, complete with occasional awnings lining the canyon walls. And for some reason, there's a ladder here that leads down to a platform from the catwalk, though we're not quite sure why, as it doesn't appear to lead anywhere. And with that, we're done covering the mountain range and the desert. So let's now turn our attention to the northwest, where we can first see a lumpy but otherwise pleasant looking mountain, filled with grass, pine trees, and gentle slopes. And there isn't too much more to say about this mountain, except that there's a shrine near the top. Oh, and we can actually peg this mountain's exact location on the map too. But what about this region's tower? Well, this is where things get a bit trickier. Partially because finding good footage is a lot tougher for these final 3 regions on this side of the world, plus I straight up ran out of time. I'm almost out of time to even put this together, so let's knock out all 3 towers at once. Because from the top of the mountain, we can just barely see the red glow of all 3. There, and there. And it's that 3rd tower that I really want to talk about anyway, because it's next to this extremely iconic mountain that looks as if it had a piece bitten right out of it. Now it's hard to tell much of anything about it from here, but the trailer does provide a close-up, revealing it as a cold, snowy region. You can even see the tracks Link left in the snow. Now we're not quite sure where he's heading, though the flags here might indicate that there's a path to follow. And that's about it for this scene, but keep an eye on the wooden structure down here, because it's the exact same wooden structure we can see in this cutscene of the Rising Towers. Look, there's that flag we mentioned before. It's the exact same area, and if we look in the background, we can see what might be a frozen waterfall or frozen something. Now if we take another look at that wooden structure down below, we can see that something appears to be moving in both scenes. What is that? Well, another clip might just reveal exactly what it is. A new type of enemy. And between his large size, horn, and big club, he looks pretty menacing. And since this is the only place we've seen them so far, they might be native to this region. And speaking of new creatures, check this out. If we zoom in on the background, we can see what appears to be some kind of giant creature doing something. Maybe picking up a tree by the looks of it. But if we look real close, it kind of looks like a Goron, who, as we mentioned before, can be rather big and do have a penchant for living in mountains. So this might just be our first glimpse of one. And could this be where that Goron city we mentioned earlier is based? And since Gorons do eat rocks, are they the ones responsible for taking the giant chomp out of the mountain? Now it's this final scene that might give us an idea of the true scope of this mountain, showing Link paragliding down the mountainside for quite some distance. But how do we really know this is the same area, besides the obvious similarities I mean? Well, it sure is awfully close to that floating island in the sky right there. Oh right, we haven't mentioned that yet, have we? You see, there's a freaking island just floating around, and it doesn't stay in place, it moves. To where or how far, we have no idea, but what we do know is that every time we've seen it, it's always been near the northwest corner of the world. In fact, we even put a peg on it to see exactly where it is on the map, or at least where it was at the time. And you can see just how close to that mountain it really is, which we also pegged precisely. So what's the deal with it? Could it have anything to do with Skyloft maybe, which itself was a floating island? There are a lot of similarities to Skyward Sword after all. But beyond that, how do you even get to it? Well, that's one question we may have an answer for. Because we have a feeling its flight path might just take it by Death Mountain, which as you probably remember, constantly spews out hot air. Yeah, you know where we're going with this. We think you might be able to use a paraglider to catch a lift from the volcano to reach the island. That would be pretty awesome, don't you think? Okay, I'm seriously running out of time before I have to wrap this up, so let's do a quick speed round of everything I couldn't cover yet. First up is this scene from the trailer. Where on earth does it take place? Well, we can see the black smoke at Death Mountain right there, but it's obscured by a mountain, which means we might be behind it. And this is backed up by the fact that the snowy mountain we just covered looks like it might be on the right side as opposed to the left where it's normally found when viewing it from the plateau. Next up is the fact that there's something weird going on over at Death Mountain. Because if you keep a careful eye on it during the full day video, you can see some sort of creatures going up and down this mountainside at various points in the day. What's going on there? And those creatures must be pretty big if we can see them all the way from back here. Could they perhaps be related to this oddity from the trailer, being this weird skeleton guy skulking along the cliff? Next up, this armor is pretty cool looking, isn't it? It wasn't in the E3 demo, so I just wanted to point it out. And then there's the fact that in this scene, Link's wearing a different hairstyle. So can you change that yourself in the final game?
Alright, and that covers everything that we could find in that section of the analysis. Of course, there's more where that came from, so be sure to check out the full analysis to see everything we could find about Breath of the Wild.